You hand a toddler a set of keys and they light up like you just gave them the moon. You watch a kid stack blocks, spin a top, drag a stuffed animal by one ear until the seams give out. You assume this is new. Plastic, mass production, a toy aisle stretching the length of a warehouse. But the real answer is far stranger. Go back 4,000 years, 5,000, even 18,000, and you find children doing almost exactly this. Not something similar. Sometimes the same object, the same motion, the same joy on a different face. Start with the obvious question. How would anyone even know? A toy from 5,000 years ago doesn't come labeled. It doesn't sit in a museum case with a plaque that says, played with by a child, Tuesday afternoon, circa 3000 BC. Most of what a kid actually plays with rots. String, fur, wood, cloth. The things that survive are the accidents. Clay that got fired by chance. Stone that outlasted everything softer around it. So for most of the history of archaeology, when researchers pulled a strange, small, decorated object out of the ground, they defaulted to one word: ritual. There's an old joke among archaeologists. If you can't explain it, call it ritual. A painted skull, a pile of oddly shaped stones, a disc with a hole drilled through the middle. Ritual, ritual, ritual. For over a century, that assumption buried an entire category of human life. Then slowly, the assumption started to crack. In Spain and Portugal, archaeologists had been digging up thousands of small slate tablets for decades, flat, palm-sized, engraved with wide, staring eyes that made them look almost like owls. Over 5,000 years old. Nobody could explain them, so nobody tried very hard. They were filed under religious symbolism and left alone. Then a team led by researcher Victor Díaz Núñez de Arenas at Complutense University in Madrid took a second look. What struck them first wasn't the imagery. It was the sloppiness. Real ritual objects from this era tended to be careful, symmetrical, precise. These were rushed. Informal. Some looked like they'd been engraved by a hand still learning how to hold a tool. The team examined 100 of them and found the engraving style shifted the way a child's drawing shifts as they age. Combined with the fact that many were found scattered through ordinary homes, not temples or shrines, the case built itself. These weren't offerings to the gods. They were toys. Owl-shaped dolls, made and reworked by children, some of them possibly carried along to funerals as a small private goodbye to someone they'd lost. That reframe matters more than it sounds like it should, because it points to something researchers in this field keep running into. Childhood in the ancient world wasn't sealed off from the serious parts of life. A toy could be a plaything and a farewell gift in the same object. Archaeologist Brenna Hassett, who wrote an entire book on the evolution of childhood, has pointed out that so much of what a child would have played with simply never had a chance to survive. String, fur, bark, wood. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. It's evidence that we're only ever looking at whatever happened to be durable enough to outlast the people who made it. Go back even further than 5,000 years into the depths of the Ice Age, and the picture gets stranger. Archaeologist Michelle Langley, who studies human evolution, took an unusual approach to a very old problem. Instead of guessing at what Ice Age children played with, she looked at hunter-gatherer communities alive today. Across dozens of cultures with no contact with each other, the same categories of object kept appearing in the hands of children. Small dolls, miniature bows, tiny versions of the tools their parents used every single day. Mud figures shaped by hand and left to dry in the sun. And often, she found, it wasn't the children making these toys at all. It was the adults. Parents spending real time, real skill, real care on an object whose entire purpose was to be dragged through dirt and eventually broken. That detail alone tells you something about how ancient parents felt about their children that no burial inscription ever could. With that framework in hand, a strange set of objects from Ice Age Europe suddenly made more sense. Flat discs the size of a large coin, carved from bone, stone, or ivory, dated to as far back as 18,000 years ago. Many have a small hole drilled through the center and an animal engraved on the surface. For a long time, these were assumed to be jewelry, or amulets, or something tied to hunting magic. But threaded onto a cord and spun, a disc like this does something specific. It twists, then untwists, and the animal engraved on its surface appears to move, flickering back and forth in a primitive kind of animation. If the oldest toy on record turns out to be a spinning picture that makes an image look alive, that reframes an entire chapter of prehistory. Before cave paintings were finished, someone may have already figured out how to make a picture move for the amusement of a child. The deeper researchers dig, the more the line between toy and tool starts to blur entirely. In the 1990s, archaeologist Catherine Camp examined a set of small clay figurines and noticed something odd pressed into the surface. Fingerprints. Not adult-sized, child-sized. The figurines themselves hadn't just been played with. They'd been made by children with their own hands, thousands of years before anyone wrote down a word about childhood at all. Move forward to the edges of the Bronze Age, and toys start showing up with an almost eerie familiarity. In Syria, archaeologist Georges Muammar led a study on a cluster of small clay rattles, roughly 4,500 years old, filled with tiny pebbles or pellets designed to make noise when shaken. Some archaeologists had argued these were meant to ward off evil spirits from a household, not entertain a child. Muammar tested the theory directly, recreating a damaged rattle and discovering it was simply too small and too quiet to have done any serious ritual work. It rattled gently, exactly the way a baby's toy rattles today. Researcher Christine Garraway, who has spent years studying similar objects from the ancient Levant, suspects both explanations might be true at once. A rattle scaring off bad spirits by day and soothing a fussy infant by night isn't a contradiction. In a world where survival and superstition sat right next to each other, a single object doing double duty made perfect sense. By the time you reach Egypt, Greece, and Rome, the toys stop needing so much detective work because they start looking almost exactly like what you'd expect. Wooden dolls with jointed limbs have turned up in Egyptian tombs dating back over 4,000 years. Some painted, some decorated with beads, some given real hair for a wig. Spinning tops carved from wood or fired from clay appear across the ancient Middle East. One example found in Iraq dated to roughly 6,000 years old. Tutankhamun himself was buried with one, a wooden top tucked among the gold meant to accompany a pharaoh into the afterlife. Children in Egypt, Greece, and Rome bent dried grapevines into hoops and rolled them down the street with a stick, the ancient version of a toy you'd still recognize in a schoolyard today. Marbles were shaped from smoothed stones and fruit pits long before anyone thought to make them out of glass. But it's the dolls, more than anything, that reveal something modern childhood has mostly lost. In Greece and Rome, a toy doll wasn't simply outgrown and discarded the way a stuffed animal gets pushed to the back of a closet. It was formally retired. When a boy reached puberty, he dedicated his childhood toys to the gods. When a girl married, she offered hers to a goddess. A toy wasn't a possession you quietly abandoned. It was a chapter of your life you closed on purpose, in public, as a ritual marking the exact moment you stopped being a child and started being something else. Which brings you back to the toddler with the keys, or the kid spinning a fidget toy between two fingers without even noticing they're doing it. The materials have changed almost completely. Plastic instead of clay. Screens instead of slate. But the instinct underneath hasn't moved an inch. A parent still spends real effort making or buying something whose entire purpose is to be dragged through the dirt and eventually broken. A child still turns any object, no matter how ordinary, into something worth spinning, shaking, or dragging around by one ear. Somewhere between 18,000 years ago and this afternoon, the tools for play changed color, shape, and material more times than anyone could count. What never changed was the impulse. You watch a kid today swipe through a tablet, stack blocks, or spin a top, and you assume you're watching something new. You're not. You're watching one of the oldest habits the species has, wearing whatever costume the current century happened to hand it. The more we learn about the past, the better we understand ourselves. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Phoenix Primeval for more fascinating stories from history, science, and human evolution. Thanks for watching.